So we're suspending the rules to allow Brandy to participate remotely first, and then we'll do a second suspension of the rules under the governor's executive order. So this one is to allow Brandy to participate remotely.
Who was the second? Steve? Okay.
Okay.
And we have to do roll call vote, so.
All right. Chairwoman Williams.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Fennell. Ms. Daly.
Aye.
Ms. Duncan.
Aye.
Mr. Renaud. Aye. Mr. Ricker. Aye. And I think that's everybody on the committee that's present. Yes, so carries unanimously, Madam Chair. Oh.
Did you call Rachel?
I didn't have Rachel. Are you on this committee, Rachel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, my bad. Ms. Relaford. My apologies. How do you vote, Ms. Relaford? Sorry about that.
I need my mic, don't I?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
The next thing is to allow a motion to approve Brandy being on the telephone. Can I have a motion for that? Linda, second. Okay, Mr. Ricker?
All right, Chairwoman Williams, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Fennell.
Aye.
Ms. Daly.
Aye.
Ms. Duncan.
Aye.
Ms. Relaford. Mr. Renaud. Mr. Ricker. All right. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. So I need a motion to approve the minutes of the May 27th, 2020 meeting and the June 11th, 2020 meeting. Mr. Fennell, and second, Ms. Daly. Are there any changes, corrections? Okay.
Okay. Chairwoman Williams.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Fennell.
Aye.
Ms. Bryant.
Aye.
Ms. Daly.
Aye.
Ms. Duncan.
Aye.
Ms. Relaford. Mr. Renaud. Mr. Ricker.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we're down to informational items. Our first is the Board of Health. Monica?
Good afternoon. More than happy to answer any questions in regards to the packet that was presented.
Monica, make sure your microphone is actually on. It's a switch versus a button.
Slide.
There you go. Green light means it's on.
There are lights on this, so.
Push it up towards your face.
Hello?
It's on the top.
Low battery. Oh. I can project. I'm pretty.
Well, why don't you come to,
We'll get you a spot.
Thank you. As I was saying, included in your packet is our May Board of Health meeting. More than happy to answer any questions regarding that, as well as provide just a quick update in terms of where we sit with our COVID response. In regards to our COVID response, the Tri-County is just shy of 600 cases at 595 cases to date between Peoria, Tazewell, and Woodford. Peoria actually only saw a 1 case increase from yesterday, and that's why it's important to keep looking at those averages, because that cleans out testing issues or days when testing sites are closed and then people kind of attend them. So overall, our 14 and 7-day averages for our Tri-County sit about at 11 cases. So that means daily we see about an increase of 11 cases, which has been consistent now for a few weeks. Some of the increases that we saw early on have kind of plateaued out that were related to long-term care facilities. As well as our hospital data, we've been monitoring 4 hospitals, so the 2 systems in total, and our 7 and 14-day average in terms of ICU beds sits around 4.5. And so again, watching that consistently as we gear up for what is on Friday, which is phase 4 of the Restore Illinois opening. Overall, the Restore Illinois, the best way to kind of summarize it, it is an expansion of non-essential services, as well as more volume or census in terms of gathering. Again, that 50 is going to be what we are looking at though, But depending on locations and entities, it might become a capacity issue of a location more so. We've been working with the school districts as well. ISBE released their guidance for starting the school year, so working with our superintendent, Kreider will be actually hosting a conversation with our school districts on what does that mean and how the health department's role is. I was already a part of the Peoria Public School Plan as part of their wellness committee that was already submitted and approved. And so more than happy to answer questions or.
Are there any questions for Monica? No questions? Okay.
And just a great update, there is a program for contact tracing. It was initially released to 2 counties, Lake and St. Clair counties. The second release starts up, and Peoria is part of the second release. So we're very excited to get that software up and running and then be able to start bringing in our staff to do contact tracing aggressively.
So that's kind of your update on the grant. So you don't have anybody on staff as of yet.
No, we have just our current staff. Our grant, because of the amount of money, the state requires us to go through additional steps because of the size of the grant. And so we hope to hear by the end of the week if there are any changes. Right now, we've heard tentatively that a lot of our personnel would already be approved. It's some of the capital and contractual services that they may come back with, but they can't piecemeal a grant contract as all or nothing. And so we do tentatively know that we'll be okay with our personnel expenses, but we have to wait for the whole thing to be approved.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Do you have a report on care and treatment?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on, sustainability and resource conservation. Karen, I saw you over there.
Well, it's good to see everyone in person again. I just have a couple things on the report that I handed in. One, I'm excited to say that for our Tri-County Green Hero, we are welcoming Kenny's West Side Pub into our fold of being a green business, and so we'd like to recognize them. We are continuing on with
Little bit closer
composting.
and hear her.
Yeah, is the mic on?
Sorry, I apologize.
That's okay.
Maybe.
We're continuing on with our food scrap composting at JDC. So we've got that program in place. And landfill committee, they did have a agreement with FOTH that is going to be extending, not just for the 1 year that there have been for the past couple of years, but they're extending it to 18 months, which is in line with what the budget was passed for the landfill committee budget. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise,
Any questions for Karen? Okay.
thank you.
Moving on, we are at Headington Oaks. We'll start with the financials. Paul, welcome, Paul.
In your packet are the financials for April 2020. Of note, we did receive 2 payments in April from the CARES Act, which totaled just under $248,000. Those were based on previously submitted Medicare revenues through cost reports, so we did receive those. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Paul? No questions? Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, we're moving on. Closure action plan. Shauna, do you want to start, and then Scott, you're going to pick up after that?
That better? No? Can you hear me okay? Okay, I can't hear myself, sorry. So in your packet is the closure action plan. The main page for us to focus on today is page 2. Pages 3, 4, and 5 are copies of the original plan that we presented to you, I believe, a month or 2 ago. So this is just the key points of update to that original plan. Currently, today, we have 5 residents remaining at Headington Oaks. All discharges and relocations have been voluntary in conjunction with the families. We negotiated with IBEW a facility closure agreement for the labor piece. And so we've completed 2 rounds of staff reductions, and we are currently in the middle of a 3rd round, and those 3rd reductions will occur kind of scattered between today, tomorrow, and Friday. So that will leave us with less than 40 staff in the facility. That probably seems like a high number for 5 residents, but a number of those, even if we have 1 resident, we're required to have a director of nursing and administrator. We have to have dietary coverage for 3 meals a day, which spreads multiple shifts. We have to have a CNA and a nurse for 3 shifts, 24/7. So that's how we still have a little bit higher number of staff than what you might think. But we are working with the staff, and the management team has been stepping up and filling in to kind of help out on the floor as well as people have vacations or job interviews or things like that. So I'm really pleased to say that throughout this process, we have not had to use any agency staff. We've been able to manage that with our own staff. And so as we move through the pandemic too, I think that was key because all of our staff and residents have tested negative for COVID. And so we wanted to make sure we were not bringing in outside individuals into the facility as well as we navigate that. So we were pleased with that. Maximum unemployment exposure so far for those who have filed, the maximum exposure is $315,000. But as we've talked about in some of the other committees with regards to the furloughs, we will not know what our total exposure is on that until we get the 2nd and 3rd quarter reports from IDES. And we just a week or 2 ago got the 1st quarter report. So it is going to be a little bit of time, but we are trying to figure out a way internally that we can survey those employees and former employees to kind of at least get a good estimate for budget, because those claims are paid out of the risk management fund. We continue to meet all of the IDPH regulatory staffing levels, like I said, without the use of agency. There is a chart regarding staffing. However, that is staffing through the end of last week. So it's a little outdated in terms of the one that's in your packet for today. Because we're down to 5 residents, 4 of the 5 units have been closed, so those 5 residents are now on 1 wing, and that's allowed us to continue to maximize the staff that we have. We have had ongoing communication with the local ombudsman office of the state ombudsman. We've been talking with them on a weekly basis and kept them in the loop when we've been doing staff reductions, census reductions, and things like that. So they've been very supportive of our process and how we've been managing that. Let's see. Oh, and in the back of the last chart, again, shows the average census through last Thursday. You'll see that we were at 12. That's because it's an average. So it averages out the total number throughout the course of the week. But again, today we are at 5. As you know, you approved the referendum on the November ballot at the last county board meeting, so we'll be moving forward with that process. The management team that is remaining in conjunction with the facility staff as well, they've been going through the fixed asset inventory list, packing, cleaning, making sure that we have all of the financial and medical records. We've been working with the state records retention office to be able to dispose of those that we can dispose of, and those that we can't, we're storing appropriately, especially if we end up needing them for the state's attorney's office or something like that. So, and we've been trying to be methodical in how we're managing our files and our record retentions. And then we've also been working through extra office supplies. We did have some extra medical supplies that now with that census we won't need, that we could not return. So we've been working with the jail and the JDC to see what supplies they can use. Even if we can't return it, then that's just less that they have to purchase. So we'll see some savings, hopefully, in some of those areas. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. And I know Scott had an update on the regulatory side, too.
Okay, Mr. Fennell?
Yeah, I didn't catch what the staffing on the 3rd reduction would be. I didn't.
It'll be around 40,
40?
give or take.
Okay.
Between 30 and 40. We still have to keep 3 or 4 CNAs just to manage the 3 shifts. And then I don't want to have to use agencies, so we maybe kept 1 extra of each category just to make sure if somebody called off sick or something like that, we had adequate coverage. So.
Yep. Are there any other questions? Linda?
Shauna, and maybe this is not the appropriate committee to ask this question of, but what are we planning to do to maximize information to voters so they understand the issue that will be before them on the November ballot, because it seems pretty important to me that we get a favorable response, so we're not paying to maintain an empty building as opposed to putting one up for sale. And I would think with all the issues that will be present in November, our strategy for doing informational things that would help them come to a decision is very important.
I agree. Scott, do you want to take that or do you want me to?
Sure. Ms. Daly, great question. And in fact, we have a meeting scheduled for the first week of July to start to outline and game plan what an educational campaign might look like. Included in that conversation is going to be Sean and myself, Gretchen, and then Mr. Gates will also be part of that initial conversation, and that group will contract or expand as needed. We'll come back and talk to the committee. It's probably at your next monthly meeting, if not before that, to talk about whether or not there's sympathetic individuals in the community that, while the county does its educational piece, you would want to recruit persons in the community that would have that would be able to coordinate a campaign that would encourage a successful referendum versus just the educational component that we would be looking at.
Linda, do you have anything additional?
No, I'm just very interested when you develop that further.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, and then you were going to...
Yep. So, Madam Chair, on the regulatory side, to refresh everyone's memory, there's two parallel paths that are being pursued. One is the process through the Health Facilities Review Board, and then the others is through IDPH. On Friday, we delivered a draft temporary suspension letter to the Facilities Review Board to, one, get it on the radar screen since we're down to a very small census at this point, and two, to solicit some feedback on how that letter was drafted. This morning, I should say, yesterday morning, we received some feedback, and the staff from the Health Facilities Review Board was very appreciative of the opportunity for input, and had no changes or suggested changes to the letter. So we will most likely be filing that later today, if not before the end of the week. The other path in the parallel path is IDPH, and that deals with the temporary suspension of the license. The temporary closure letter. And if you recall, we had some concerns about this because we initially thought that once we file the temporary closure documentation, and if something would come out of the woodwork and we'd want to undo that, we would not be able to do that. Our regulatory consultant had a conversation with IDPH this morning, who themselves had no comments on the temporary licensure suspension from the Facilities Review Board perspective, but also talked to us about the temporary closure letter, and they seem very comfortable with our situation. They believe that we are able to file that, and if something would occur, we would be able to unwind that if necessary. The value in us moving ahead with doing that, which we plan to do by the end of the week, is that it gives us much more flexibility with having to relocate the remaining 5 residents. 2 of the 5 of those remaining residents are going to be public guardian residents where they have no next of kin, no power of attorney. One of them, which would make 3 of the 5 residents, We've made multiple attempts to contact their power of attorney and have been unsuccessful. So if necessary, we would be potentially looking at moving towards a public guardianship situation for that resident as well. What that does is it gives us flexibility, it gives some protection to any facility that we would be trying to work with to place those residents into. That protection comes from IDPH. So as long as we're in that guardianship process in terms of trying to get the guardianship applied, IDPH is going to be willing to work with us and assist us as necessary. We estimate, let me back up and say that the State Guardian, Office of the State Guardian is a state agency that has been working remotely. We've made a couple of attempts to obtain the appropriate paperwork, because it's not something you can just readily download on their website or anything like that. We've been unsuccessful to this point, but we're going to give it another couple of days before we start to pull some other levers. Once we receive that paperwork and the forms that we need to complete for each one of those residents that we would need to be looking at public guardianship for, we would, we're looking at probably a 2 to 3 week period before we could get the guardianship approval from the court. It'd be in the circuit court here locally and Judge Brown's courtroom. And then it would move pretty quick in terms of relocating each one of those residents once that occurs. We potentially could be financially liable for any room and board rates or any fees with the new facility until each one of those residents successfully receives their Medicaid pending status. We've done some quick financial analysis of what that looks like, and that is something that most likely would be cost favorable compared to an extended period of process where we would continue to have to operate the facility with the regulatory staffing that Shauna outlined for 5 or fewer residents. So we started to look at what that looks like and see where the cost benefit is, and we'll continue to move down the process of working with the Office of the State Guardian and working with the families of the other 2 residents to try and get them successfully placed in the best possible facility for them. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Ms. Daly?
So then, am I to conclude from what you're saying that the 3 people we're investigating public guardianship for have not had a long-term care Medicaid determination?
Shauna?
I believe 2 of the 3 have. One is still in that pending status, and that's going to be the one that we will have an issue. I know one of them, I think we just got approval for, I believe, and the other one has a financial POA that I believe they have been filing the Medicaid paperwork. So those 2 should be fine. There's really one of the 3 that's still in that pending status because there's been no one that can sign off on that, was my understanding from them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Ms. Daly? No? Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, just what's the status on the other 2?
Three and then the 2. Okay. So the sorry, slow math day for me. The other 2 do have powers of attorney. We are just having some difficulty placing them in a facility. But we're still getting referrals, and so we're still confident that we'll find somewhere there.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. We are moving on to committee action. Review of executive session minutes. Can I get a motion on the floor to, Rachel? Okay, second?
Second.
Betty? Go ahead.
Yes, this is the process we go through approximately every 6 months to review executive session minutes. So after review of this committee's executive session minutes index, as in the past, it's the recommendation of the state's attorney's office that all previously held minutes continue to be held because the need for confidentiality still exists, and to destroy executive session audio recordings that are more than 2 years old, except for those that relate to pending litigation. So that would be the recommendation from the state's attorney.
Okay. Roll call.
All right, so roll call vote. Chairwoman Williams.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Fennell.
Aye.
Ms. Allison. Ms. Bryant.
Aye.
Ms. Daly. Ms. Duncan.
Aye.
Ms. Relaford. Mr. Renault. And Mr. Ricker.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. We are down to miscellaneous. I did receive a letter from someone that I'm just going to go ahead and read. Dear members, and this is for the Peoria County Health Committee. I speak to you regarding the socially irresponsible and questionably ethical move of Headington Oaks residents to various facilities during an unprecedented pandemic. We as healthy citizens of Illinois and Peoria County were ordered to remain home as much as possible and interact with people as little as possible. Yet you authorize the most vulnerable population to be removed from their home in order to accomplish the closing of a county-funded nursing home. They were thrust into a new environment without understanding the reason. I acknowledge they might have contracted the virus at Headington Oaks, but at least they have been cared for by professional caring staff who knew their history. At some point, this needs to be addressed in some way. Sincerely, Elizabeth Cashman. I just wanted to read that into the record. Is there any other miscellaneous? No more miscellaneous? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.